But around the same time in which the two prime ministers were shaking hands, troops were already clambering up the heights. Most probably not known to the Pakistani Prime Minister himself. So many officers and men, my goodness, their courage, you can do nothing but stand up and salute. It is amazing. It is the officers and men of the Indian Army who won the Kargil war for us. We did not cross the line of control. We did not escalate the war, but we ensured that every man, Jack, who had infiltrated was thrown out in disgrace. If you have to walk in those heights, you are moving uphill, where you have to stop for breath after 10 feet and expect you to charge up onto a machine gun firing at you from above. That act itself calls for nothing more than complete courage and complete dedication. See, Vikram Batra, the people who have seen the operation, they say he deserved not one, he deserved two PVCs. He participated in two separate operations.
Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. July is the month for the Kargil war. I have with me Col Ajay Singh, who's going to take us through the story of the Kargil war. Col Ajay Singh, a soldier scholar with 28 years in the Indian Army, he's a real expert on the real military history of India, not the ones that we find in various documentaries printed by various different agencies. He's an author of 4 books, and I think the 5th one is coming out by before the year end. We're all awaiting that.
Hopefully, yes.
And I've had the privilege of talking to him twice before. Once on the military history of India, and the second was the Battle of Bana Top in the Operation Meghdoot or the Battle of Siachen. If you haven't seen those videos, please do check it out. It gives you a real insight of what these two stories are all about. Thank you, sir, for joining me today.
Such a pleasure, Adi. It always is a pleasure being on your show, and I'm looking forward to this, especially in this month when you're commemorating Kargil.
I think we should term it the month of Kargil, as I was just saying.
Yes.
You know,
The month of remembering Kargil.
There have been so many battles right from July 1st. The major battles that we experienced and the losses that we got. Each day there is a notification of some sort saying that this martyr died in this place during this battle and stuff. It's a sad thing, but it's very happy to see people still remembering these heroes. Sir, to open out, I'd like to just base the conversation by understanding what is the background of the Kargil war. Everybody knows what happened. I want you to tell us what is the background on which it started.
Thank you, Adi. Now the Kargil war actually began in May. That is when the fighting erupted. But the infiltration had gone on almost the winter before that, and the planning process had been going on for years before. This contingency to occupy positions across the LAC in Kargil had been put up right at Benazir Bhutto's time by the then chief. And she had turned it down, the prime minister, saying, it is too fraught with risk. Now, when Parvez Musharraf took over as chief of the army staff, he reactivated that plan to occupy the heights along Kargil once again. And ironically, these plans were activated around the same time when Prime Minister Vajpayee was in Lahore and they were talking peace with Nawaz Sharif. Almost at the same time, this is such a historical peace meeting. Had it taken place and gone off correctly, who knows what a trajectory the Indian-Pakistan relationship should have taken. But around the same time in which the two prime ministers were shaking hands, troops were already clambering up the heights. Most probably not known to the Pakistani Prime Minister himself.
That is, there are stories about this. As a matter of fact, Musharraf claims that he had taken the Prime Minister to, one of the heights on their side of the border, of course, and told him this is where we are and everything. But, the clarity on this whole situation, because Nawaz Sharif's camp always has maintained the fact that he did not have any idea of what was happening.
Yes.
Sir, coming to the main, if this was a Hindi movie, the villain would have been Parvez Musharraf. Coming
He,
to the
uh,
coming so, and I believe as we were discussing last time as well during the video on the Battle of Siachen, that he had a lot of personal interest in this entire operation.
yes, yes.
What was it, and what did he plan to do actually?
Okay. This actually could be a case study of understanding the mind of a very egoistic and ambitious man. General Parvez Musharraf, this was his brainchild. He was the architect of the Kargil operation. And like you correctly brought out, he claims to have briefed Nawaz Sharif. Now, Nawaz Sharif was briefed about the impending Kargil operations by a close aide of Nawaz Sharif who was there. He said the line of control was removed on that map. So, in the briefing, only told he will be occupying positions here, 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 here. Nowhere was it brought out to be going across the Indian side of the LOC and occupying positions. It's only when they got back and the aide pointed it out to Nawaz Sharif that he raised hackles and said, "Nothing doing, buddy. This is not on." But then it was late. So now he has used a guard. We have taken my prime minister confidence. But no, that was not the full truth. And what was, remember, that time had the army chief, appointed as the army chief by Nawaz Sharif himself, superseding two others. But what was his, why was that really driving ambition to go into a war when the two countries were all set to change the entire track of relations? I have analyzed his personality quite a bit. And if you take a look at right from 1965 onwards, read his book, In the Line of Fire, you get a great idea of how his thinking is. He keeps on talking so much about, when firstly, he talks about the 65 war. Then he talks about 71 war, how it rankled the splitting up of the country. And Siachen. Now, in Siachen, remember, he was the first battalion that went in. There was 3 commando SSG. Incidentally, his own battalion. That was 1984. That was repulsed. That was a battalion that got repulsed by our first troops on the Saltoro Heights. Then, when he took over the commander of the Special Services Group in 1987, he had been handpicked by Zia-ul-Haq because he was known to be a man of dynamism and a go-getter kind of guy. He launched a series of operations and actions that captured some very major heights, not captured, occupied some major heights along the Saltoro ridgeline, including Kaid Post, the very famous Kaid Post. Right? This was viewed as a huge victory for him till the Indians captured Kaid again in June 1987. This was a defeat for him. And the counter-attacks which he launched to regain it at huge cost. His crack commando battalion launched in the snow. But when you know how it is in the mountains, when you're occupying the heights and you got the fire support, the attacker has got very slim chance. His counterattacks were beaten back with heavy casualties. And the army was personally rebuffed by Benazir Bhutto, who gave them gifts for bangles and a burqa. These must have rankled him. They definitely did rankle him. And when he took over as chief, one of the rationale for launching the operation was he would occupy those heights along the Kargil height, all overlooking the national highway leading from Srinagar to Leh. His concept was, by occupying it and blocking that highway, all Indian supplies to Siachen will be interdicted. And we'll be forced to vacate it. It will fall like a ripe plum into their arms. Nothing wrong in the operational level thinking of this plan. But they did not realize the kind of a scale of a response that would follow. And it was this one man, General Parvez Musharraf, who overruled his Prime Minister acted against the interests of his own nation and launched the operation.
Mm. The story says there were these 3-4 generals who, I mean, it's always the rumor that floats around that it was 4 generals who planned this attack. And
Yes.
the
The
operation.
general,
Sorry.
the general were he himself, of course, the commander of 10 Corps, the commander of the FCNA, who was then in charge of the operation, and the divisional commanders who would be involved. Even they say the chief and the navy were not taken. This was all done for secret reason of secrecy, as they put it. But even the Air Force and the naval chief were activated and briefed about that plan only after it had been set in motion. So, in many ways, this was like a rogue one-man show.
And they gave a very interesting name, Operation Badr.
Yes.
So yes, occupying the road, fine. That's what their given objective was. What do you think beyond that? Did they have any further plans to kind of budge deep inside, or they just wanted to sit there and basically harm the supply lines going into Siachen, thereby resulting in some sort of a failure of the Indian Army in Siachen? Or was there any other strategic objective that they had along with this?
See, their aim of Operation Badr, if you take a look at it operationally, it was not a bad plan. It was not a good plan, it was. Okay, moving up in secrecy, occupy all the heights, interdict the highway, and prevent supplies from reaching Kargil. Okay, had that plan worked, it would have been a huge success for the Pakistani army. Remember, they were reeling under a series of failures since 1971. The other thing was, if you remember, 99 was a period in which insurgency in Kashmir was completely on the way. Things were just starting to stabilize. And one of his understated goals was to re-raise the Kashmir issue in the world fora. Remember, when the troops went in, he did not say Pakistani troops were there. They were supposedly Mujahids who had gone there. Pakistani soldiers in Salwar Kameez and Firhans. So, he thought, okay, I'll raise the Kashmir issue, make Siachen fall without much of a fight, and at the same time by sitting inside Indian territory. De facto, remember, if you've occupied, even if you moved 5 kilometers inside Indian territory, you are de facto, you have captured enemy territory.
Yeah.
These were the thoughts and these were the aims by which he launched Operation Badr. Like I said, operationally, not a bad plan at all. Strategically, he did not consider the wider ramifications at all. That is why it turned out to be such a fiasco that it was.
I think this covers pretty much the basis of this operation from the Pakistani side. And I'd like to, ask you a tricky sort of a question, because a lot of the times whenever we discuss this in any particular program or this and that, there's one thought that always nags us, is how come the Pakistanis came and sat there and we didn't even come to know for about, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5 months.
Correct.
How are we so, blindly unaware of what is happening? Is that the case, or did we realize it during winters and we decided to act on the summers? This is something that has not been clarified at all. So I'd like you to put some light onto this, sir.
Without mincing any words, it was a colossal intelligence failure. We cannot have any excuses for the fact that they were allowed to come in along the entire frontage from Moscow to Batalik, occupy positions which are held by the Indian Army during summer deployment, and not be detected. That was an intelligence failure for which they should not even try to hide it beneath the carpet, nor should we try to condone it.
Correct.
Because the intrusions, they actually began the intrusions sometime in September 1998, when they went up to see there was what was the reaction. No reaction crept in further. Musharraf himself said that around March, he himself spent a night inside Indian territory across the LOC. He's very proud of that. He posted in his book out there. And they kept on going, crouching, building up anti-aircraft, carrying guns out there, building up the artillery behind it. The fact that we remain unaware of it is an intelligence fiasco, without mincing words.
That is, something that bothers all of us. I think
Yes.
I'm sure the capability has developed far beyond what it was in 1999, and the awareness of such treachery has obviously been understood as well. So I'm sure the army has come up with their own plans and procedures to ensure that these kind of things are not done, and one can see that with the reaction in Ladakh. So it's not that one mistake has not been learnt, and that's a very happy thing. So one another question is, how did we discover these guys sitting on top?
Okay.
What happened when
Yeah.
we discovered? And basically, I want you to start with how did we discover and take us through what were the initial reactions that we
Okay.
took, and
Thank
what were
you.
the initial
Okay.
stages of the war, sir?
Okay. Like remember when they had moved in out there, that little signs of their presence were coming out, little firing was being detected, things like this. But the crux actually came when on the 3rd of May, a shepherd told us that he told the Indian Army that he had seen troops in black uniforms in the heights. He was looking for a lost sheep and he saw that. He told the Indian Army that. Then, in the Kaksar sector, on the 5th of May, Lieutenant Saurav Kalia's patrol of 4 Jat disappeared. It was ambushed by the Pakistanis, and as you know, their bodies were badly mutilated, and it was very tragic. Then, the news of enemy sources being visible at the heights were coming up across the entire front. Then they fired at a Canberra reconnaissance aircraft that had been sent to overfly it, which was the indicator, the culminator, that there is something out there. This firing of the Canberra took place on the 7th of May.
7th of May.
Now is when we woke up, and when we awoke to the fact that there's a large enemy presence out there that has to be removed. And that is when, on the 15th of May, Operation Vijay was launched to evict them along those heights.
I'm sure a daunting task when it would have started, sir. So how did it start? What was the first steps that were taken, sir?
Well, again, when the initial reaction was disjointed. We knew that there were enemies sitting on the heights. The troops were told, we didn't know how many. They were told, चूहे आ गए, उनको निकालो वहां से. But when our first attacks went in, when our first troops started closing in, they were met with coordinated fire coming all around, and they discovered that it is not a minor intrusion. It is a full-fledged invasion across the entire frontage. And that is when the wheels of machinery of the Indian Army began moving. It began moving slowly. But when it moved very fast thereafter. Troops were moved into the sector, artillery pieces were sent in out there, air power moved in out there, and then Operation Vijay began gaining momentum. Till all of May, I would say till the end of May is when we started off. It became all of June was almost stabilizing. We were coming close. And towards the end of June and beginning of July is when the tide turned towards in our favor.
I mean, loads of blood was spilled in those initial days.
Yes.
I guess we just didn't know what was happening.
Most of them didn't know. They were going up, artillery pieces were not there. I mean, so many attacks went in without lack of adequate artillery. It's only later on when artillery built up, because to assault at those heights, you need intense covering fire. That only came when the artillery built up and the bow force built up its sufficient strength. When our troops could attack under a very heavy covering bombardment. That is what actually tilted the scales.
Interesting, sir. So I'm sure there were certain objectives which were set out for the Indian Armed Forces. In simple terms, would you be able to explain to us what were they? What were the political objectives? What are the strategic objectives that were set up? And what were the directions given to the commanders that, boss, this is what needs to be done?
Okay. You mean the political directions, right? Well, the directive in a nutshell was Indian territory will be cleared of all intruders. In a nutshell, it was as simple as that. But there was a political caveat. It also said to do so, the line of control will not be crossed, either by the air or on ground. This had an enormous bearing on the operation because the initial plans, when they were discussing, of course, contingency, like all good military soldiers do, one of the things that came across is rather than attack them frontally, let's go behind, attack the bases. These guys will be starved and fall to death. Since you could not cross the line of control, those plans were scrapped. And then it involved direct assaults straight onto the enemy. And then to go about it, you started off with clearing. They said, okay, the initial objectives were clearing the national highway, or rather clearing the heights overlooking the national highway. So one by one, the heights along the national highway were cleared. And our first success, the first major success of the war came on the 13th of June, when Tololing was captured. That was one of the heights. Now remember, that became a base from which you could roll down to the other positions and gradually clear them one by one. It was not, I would say, it was literally, you had to fight peak by peak, knoll by knoll, ridgeline by ridgeline. And the turning moment, I think, Tololing, of course, marked the shift of fortunes. The turning moment came on the 4th of July, when Tiger Hill was captured. That was the highest point in that area. That allowed the domination and fire to be brought onto the other side. After that, the initiative lay completely with us.
For those of us who's probably forgotten or probably misplaced, Captain Vikram Batra, Paramveer Chakra.
Yes. Him and so many like him. So many officers and men. My goodness, their courage, you can do nothing but stand up and salute them. It is amazing. It is the officers and men of the Indian Army who won the Kargil war for us. It is sheer courage and fortitude. Nothing more.
Even the Battle of Tololing, sir.
Yes.
One of the first peaks, I'm sure the commanders on the ground would have been nervous as heck when the entire battle was taking place. And it's not something that you can't observe. I mean, sitting on the ground, you can see what's happening on top. You can take a good binocular and you know exactly what's happening, how your troops are suffering and the casualties and so on and so forth. It would have been a harrowing experience for the commanders down leaving. I'm just not, because to put into words what the soldiers on top are going through is very difficult. So I'm just, that is a indescribable moment. But I think the commanders on the ground also would have been so nervous looking at what is happening.
Of course. Across the entire, not only on the ground, all the way up to the army chief, the prime minister himself. They were following the events with bated breath. Let me tell you one more story.
Sir.
When the attack on Tololing was to go in, to Rajrif, which was to have gone in for the attack, they got a call, the CO got a call by no less than the defense minister himself.
Wow.
To wish the boys good luck. In a way, that's a way of building the morale as well. But what I'm trying to say is this: how closely the operations were being monitored.
That is something to be believed and understood, sir. Sir, there are also a couple of things that people talk about. One is, when we started capturing these heights and stuff like that, a lot of the times people ask that why didn't the Pakistanis react in the way that we were attacking them as well? We brought in our air power, we brought in heavy artillery, we brought in, pretty much the entire force bore down on the ones that were sitting on top. One big question looms that why didn't the Pakistanis do the same thing?
Well, First, I remember ours was a very coordinated campaign with very clear-cut aims. That coordination was lacking among the Pakistanis. Secondly, they had been exposed for what they were. Intruders in uniform who had come in the garb of Mujahideen. Had they escalated the air war, they would be at the receiving end and much more. It also suited their interest to keep the battle confined to Kargil. Had the fronts opened, say to encompass Jammu and Kashmir, maybe beyond that on the IB as well, can you imagine what would be the repercussions thereafter? Prime Minister Vajpayee and we did a marvelous job by having a localized war and controlling it there. But for Pakistan, they could not dare to escalate any beyond, because then the defeat would have been compounded even more.
You know, a lot of the people who talk about rhetoric, humko marna chahiye tha unko wahan par jaake and this and that, forget the strategic values of certain decisions which are taken. Probably in hindsight, today we realize that I don't know if it's true, sir, and this is something that I personally believe in. We got a lot of diplomatic value across the world because we didn't cross the LOC. Would you agree with something like that?
Yes. You see, true. That is very. Firstly, the political handling of the war was very mature, very brilliant. We were very fortunate. I think we had one of India's finest prime ministers at the end there. Prime Minister Vajpayee, he gave the forces clear-cut directions what was required. Our diplomats were given clear-cut directives what to say to the world community. We did not cross the line of control. We did not escalate the war, but we ensured that every man jack who had infiltrated was thrown out in disgrace. Also remember, you see, all those people who talk so much about jingoism, the war could have been escalated.
Yep.
Remember, they followed with the parliament attack just a year later. Again, we came very close to war. But why did this prime minister not do so? Because our economy had just begun opening up. We were just moving ahead. And as a senior statesman, as a very mature prime minister and a national leader, he took the very mature decision of controlling this conflict and not going into an all-out war, which would have put our economy back by 10 years once again. So, politically and militarily, I think this was a very well-handled operation.
It's a very brilliant point you brought out, so I must say. Everybody thinks of, when we talk about these battles, it's always the ground situation. Everybody wants to do stuff. But there is a lot more that goes into fighting a battle. It's not just firing bullets. It's also about a whole lot of other things. Public perception, the world's perception, a circular economy, so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
We were talking about the Indian Air Force. So I have two questions in this, not two questions. I have two parts to this one question. The role of the Indian Air Force in Kargil and the unknown role of the Indian Navy.
Very good.
Would you like to
I'm very happy you used just the right word, the unknown role of the Indian Navy. Now remember, I spoke to you about coordination and of our forces operating in tandem. The three forces along with the political forces, the diplomacy, everybody. Right? The Indian Air Force, as you know, we came into play. We had Canberra damaged. And the initial days of the war, on the 26th or 28th of May, we had a terrible day, 20th of May, I think it was, when we lost a MiG-23 and a MiG-21. And lost only the Ahuja as well in that. That was a terrible day. For the first day, firstly, when we did not expect that they have come with such a reaction. We didn't expect Stinger missiles up there on the heights. Then the very next day, we lost a Mi-17 helicopter with squadron leader Pundir on board and 7 other ranks. Those were the days when we didn't know what exactly was there on the ground. Now, when we realize the magnitude, I'm not talking about the Air Force only, even the Army, when we realize the magnitude of the threat which exists, that's when the Air Force took a different stance. Remember, they too had the caveat that they could not cross the LOC even on the air. So your bombing runs, your strike runs all become more predictable. You have to be careful to pull back before you cross the LOC. We are talking at and moving at supersonic speeds. In that, they began modifying weaponry to fire from heights, fire on targets which are barely visible and barely marked on maps. And in spite of that, they did a marvelous role in suppressing the enemy. And more than that, keeping the Pakistani Air Force completely at bay. It was not just firing at bunkers. That political message of our preparedness was going out. The Navy was making its plans for, in case things escalate, the naval blockades which could have followed, naval action that could have followed against Pakistan. They were all in place. And these things, with all forces operating in tandem, sending out the correct message, is what enabled Kargil to be, I would say, a complete victory.
Jointness.
Yes. Not supportedness.
That's the big debate today. And I think
a lot of lessons,
a lot of lessons were learned from Kargil with regards to this particular concept. And a lot of work was done after that as well. Of course, people can criticize whatever is happening around, and to each his own in terms of criticism. That's fine. But I also believe that there has been a lot of good that happened after Kargil. A lot of lessons were learned as to how not to do things. I mean, but say in hindsight, I'd like to still ask you, having said the fact that we have understood with what you just said and with history on our part, that diplomatically it was a big win for us by not escalating the war.
Yes.
Tactically speaking, sir, would it have been easier just to surround them? Was escalating it, crossing the line of control? I'm just talking tactically. It's not a strategic.
You are talking. You have got this was something that has been debated so much. Yes, had we got a free hand to move behind, capture their bases, we would have not suffered the casualties we did in having to make frontal assaults on a well-trenched enemy at the heights. But in the overall scheme of things, the political, the military, the global perception, everything, the response which we eventually did decide to do was the correct one.
Interesting. So I'd like you to spend some time on the heroes. I mean, of course, each man participated in that, even in as what the big wrong word today is, in a supporting role as well. I don't believe anybody is a supporting role, all our warriors. Right. But every person, from the last person who was sending rice, let's say from South India, or the packed food that went in from the Defense Food Research Laboratory in Karnataka and Maharashtra, each one of them participated in the war, sir. But I'd like you to spend some time on the guys who actually captured those, those magnificent heights. We've seen in the news recently some of the parents of people who died in those battles actually revisited those places.
Yes.
I'd like you to spend a little time telling us about some of those heroes.
The Kargil war was full of heroes, known and unknown. Like I told you, we won this war purely on the strength and courage of our officers and men. No other army would have attacked the heights the way they did. And each one of them, Captain Vikram Batra, he's a national hero. Manoj Pandey, Anuj Nair, Adhikari, you name them, one after the other. Yogendra, there are so many of them. And we only know the names of the awardees. Every man Jack did what he had been told to do. Climb up the hills assault, attack, and regain the feature. Many were recognized, and hundreds more will remain unrecognized to anyone except those within the immediate community. And those, remember, when you're each action was an act of individual courage. If you have to walk in those heights, you're moving uphill, where you have to stop for breath after 10 feet and expect to charge up onto a machine gun firing at you from above. That act itself calls for nothing more than complete courage and complete dedication. And when I say every man did his job, not a single known incident of cowardice was recorded throughout the war. That gives an idea of the dedication of our officers and men who participated. See, Vikram Batra, the people who have seen the operation, they say he deserved not one, he deserved 2 PVCs. He participated in 2 separate operations. Even the second operation, 5140, he was not supposed to be going there. He volunteered to go there. When he made that last charge on that machine gun bunker, when he was killed, unfortunately, his buddies was to have said, I will charge you, give me covering fire. He said, nothing doing. Tu shadi shuda hai, tu baith, main jata hu. And he led that last charge. And so almost everybody, each officer who participated out there had the same thought mindset. So many of them. And these officers who went out there knowing they are going to die, they wrote last letters home and saying, I'm going, and if I have to do it, I'm giving this task. I've been told this task again, I shall do so once again. The same thing. That speaks to the level of motivation which was there and remains there even now.
It's hard to even fathom that. I mean, sitting in such comfortable lives, it's hard to even fathom what a 21-year-old guy is thinking. When we were 21, all we cared was where to buy the next cigarette. And here are people who are saying, my life, fair enough.
It doesn't matter. Yes.
Doesn't matter. On the Pakistani side, sir, history records itself. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have written books, but all books are of different versions. Nobody actually follows a similar version. I'd like to ask you, what happened in the Pakistani side that they literally, one could see by the, beginning of July, the Pakistani their entire establishment started breaking down. I mean, you could see a lot of infighting, which resulted in a coup after that. Of course, it started all in Kargil and it resulted in whatever happened in October and so on and so forth. But, how would you analyze the situation in Pakistan? Was it just plain simple helplessness? Was it to pin Musharraf onto a wall? What was it? What was exactly happening there?
Okay. You see, like I told you, when the operation took place, in many ways, it was an operation done in isolation by the army, by a select coterie within the army. Right? Kargil, or the news of what's really happening in Kargil did not start going down. In the beginning, of course, there was a lot of jingoism, and everyone was very, very excited. And then the news of the reverses started trickling down. That also stopped. It's only when the casualties started flooding into Skardu Base Hospital. And remember, the troops who participated, they were all from the Northern Light Infantry and the commandos. They were locals. The news of the losses started coming in. I mean, to the scale of the casualty of suffering, the people started becoming aware of it. The media became aware of it. Around early July is when they realized the kind of debacle that is taking place at those heights out there. And Nawaz Sharif, on the 4th of July, he flew down to USA to meet President Bill Clinton, supposedly for help. And there also, he was rudely castigated. He was told, get your bloody troops out of there. Nobody, not one nation supported the action. It was seen so completely wrong even then. And when he came back, and That's when, in no uncertain terms, they were told that the Pakistani army has to withdraw. And tactically, and as far as the world pressure was going on, the Pakistani army had no option. The men were dying on the mountains, their supply lines were being cut off. They started leaving their dead behind. The Pakistani army abandoned their dead in those heights, something no army ever does. They were buried by the Indian army. And when the withdrawal started taking place, when they started vacating it one by one, they were losing most of the heights. Those that remained were isolated. And when they began moving, one by one, the Indian army was reoccupying every height that had been lost. And the 26th of July, that is the day we call Kargil Divas, was the day the last position was vacated. In Pakistan, of course, this has been considered, like you take a look at most of the writers. For them, they say Kargil was Pakistan's greatest defeat after 1971. And this is what everyone says, except for Parvez Musharraf, who kept on maintaining it is a victory. Why? Because I got the world attention back to Kashmir, which was complete nonsense. And then you know what happened thereafter. Even the relationship between the army and the political leadership had broken up so completely. Just 3 months later, Parvez Musharraf launched a coup, imprisoned the very man who appointed him as chief of army staff, and took over as the president of Pakistan. So the turmoil, I would say Kargil, had Kargil not taken place, and we had got two very mature political leaders, Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif. Both of them, they genuinely want peace. We would have worked out. I wonder, I keep, again, as a historian, the what if factor is very strong in my mind. I keep on thinking, what if Kargil had not taken place? The shape of Indo-Pak relationships would have changed tremendously after that. But scuttling it the way it was, the way that peace initiative was scuttled by Parvez Musharraf and his coterie, has put it back not 20 years, I would say put it back 70 years. That same mistrust and lack of faith, it'll be virtually impossible for us to trust them any longer after this.
Yeah. After this and a lot many else things that they've done.
Oh, of course. yes, that it never stopped.
The trust factor, I don't think so. So when somebody talks or even mentions the fact that we should talk to Pakistan, one has seen the reactions online where people are livid. They're just livid about it because...
No, we do want peace, definitely. But now, whenever we are talking about anything, we first talk about guarantees. Because we have realized their word cannot be taken at all.
I think it was one of the turning moments for us when we realized that, there can be treachery which can happen with regards Pakistan, and trust of Pakistan, I guess, the downward trend started from there. People have tried after that.
The lack of trust is always there, but this was actually a very strong moment which helped break. But look at it again. If you take a look at what happened after Kargil, we again went back to confidence building. We went back to talks again. So again, he spoke to Musharraf in 2003. We had talks. He had come to Agra. The talks failed, but we had a ceasefire in Siachen. We had a ceasefire along the line of control. All these things, India had got its stature right. All these things allowed us to focus on our economic growth. And the rise in national power and national stature came thanks to the manner in which the Kargil war was handled so well by both the military and the political leadership.
Interesting. So lastly, the fear of a repeat. I think it's a very human tendency to, if you fall down a step one time, you always, for the next some time at least, you're going to be careful when you're walking down the steps, because you know the pain, the suffering that you went through when you fall down the leg and fall down the stairs, probably injure yourself. So the pain is real. The pain is not just with the army, the pain is in the entire country, because it's the countrymen that lost their brothers. The army, of course, lost their soldiers and men, but it's the families that actually lost their sons, their brothers, the sisters, their known ones along the entire game. Question, having mentioned all that, I have a very, very simple question. Do you think the Pakistanis could do this again to us, or even the Chinese for that matter?
Good, good. Of course, it happened, hasn't it? When the Chinese moved into their side of the across the LAC last March, what was it? It was the same thing in a different sector. And even now, look at the LOC and the LAC. It's physically impossible to man every inch of it.
Absolutely.
So, Kargil can be repeated in different places at different times. We have to just evolve the methodology which based on intelligence and surveillance and rapid reaction forces to ensure that it can be contained should it ever take place again.
That's I think a very wise way of putting it. So although I mentioned that was my last question, but something just popped into my mind, and I'd like to ask you this.
Okay.
If you look at the war in Kargil, and a lot of people call it an operation, I call it a war. It was actually a war.
It was a war.
Yeah. If you look at it, no other battle in the world has been fought in this particular manner. I mean, obviously there aren't heights of this sort around the world. When the Indian Army, in its stature of a war-fighting machine, gained a lot of credibility within the world. And I'm sure the Chinese also realize that, with the actions that were taken right now, and the actions which happened during Kargil itself, the frontal assaults that you were talking about, it's basically suicidal missions. And not one person ever regretted just going into a fray of bullets, knowing the fact that he's not going to be able to come down. And even if he gets hit, how's he supposed to be carried down from 21,000 feet or 20,000 feet or 18,000 feet for that matter? What do you think the world impression of the Indian Army was before this, and how did it change?
See, firstly, the world loves a winner. And the stature of the Indian Army went up tremendously after 71. And 99 consolidated it. More than anything else, it was our military might compound, because see, military power is an instrument of national power.
Correct.
Kargil amplified our national power beautifully. Remember, in 1998, we had tested the nuclear explosions at Pokhran. Pakistan followed suit. We were almost pariahs at that time. But we retrieved all that lost ground by a mature handling in 99 in Kargil. I shudder to think what would happen had we had a jingoistic, populistic leadership which aims at votes and cheap popularity, making slogans like "bomb dalenge," faking it, nonsensical things like this in that war. Then the credibility and the outcome would not have been what it was when it was handled by Prime Minister Vajpayee and his team. So yes, that handling, both political and military, is what enhanced our stature and paved the way to what followed. Economic growth, the Indo-US coming together, all these things followed in the wake of Kargil. That, and of course, and other global events that took place.
Fantastic. That is actually very heartening to hear. This has been a wonderful conversation, sir. As a matter of fact, normal regular story of Kargil would actually talk about Tiger Hill, Tololing, and everything like that. We did touch upon those. But of course, it is also important for us to understand the impact of the war. The impact on the war on the adversary, the impact on the war on us. What exactly happened in the background is what we've spoken about. What exactly were the connotations of each and every action is what we've spoken about. Why didn't we cross the LOC? One of the biggest questions that is debated even till And I think the Colonel has given us a very, very clear answer. Tactically, it would have been a great thing. It would have been much easier. But I guess we gained a lot when we didn't in terms of diplomacy, which is also part of the national power, as again, Colonel Ajay was just putting across. Uh, it is important for us to show our maturity. And I think this particular talk has brought about the factor that the Kargil war was handled with utmost maturity from all the three services, from all the people, from politicians to anybody that was involved in this entire conflict. It was taken up in a very, very professional way. I think this is going to be a very, very important conversation if people would listen to it, which will come up, which will bring about rather than the story that a lot of people know by now, but the background and the impact of each and every one of those actions. Sir, thank you so much for this journey through Kargil. Of course, we would be witnessing thoroughbred celebrations in this entire month of July, and I'm sure it is going to be alive for time to come, sir. My gratitude to each and every soldier who went there. My gratitude to each and every family who lost a loved one in that place. I don't think any amount of words would be ever able to compensate them, but God bless them and the souls that departed us.
So thank you very much, Adi. It's been a pleasure being on your show as it always is. And I look forward to it. I really do hope people would enjoy it and get some insights of what happened in those days of 1999.
Thank you, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you.